There are moments in history when entire bodies of knowledge vanish almost overnight, not because they stopped working, but because the world around them changed faster than people could adapt. One of those moments came in August of 1969, when a single storm erased not just homes and roads, but an entire American industry built on one of the most effective natural materials ever discovered. What disappeared wasn't just a crop, it was a method, a way of protecting wood so durable and reliable that it had already survived for over 2,000 years. Today that method still exists, unchanged, waiting for anyone willing to understand it and use it properly. This is not theory, and it's not nostalgia. This is practical survival knowledge tested across centuries that you can apply with your own hands. The story begins long before modern chemistry had a name for what was happening. Over 2 millennia ago in southern China, craftsmen were already using oil extracted from the seeds of the tung tree to solve a problem that has always plagued human construction: how to make wood survive water. Wooden structures rot, warp, and fail when exposed to moisture over time. For early civilizations dependent on wooden tools, buildings, and ships, this wasn't a minor inconvenience, it was a constant threat to survival. Chinese builders found their solution in tung oil. Records dating back to the era associated with Confucian writings describe its use in waterproofing boats, sealing architecture, and finishing tools. But its real proving ground came during the Song dynasty, when Chinese shipbuilders began constructing massive ocean-going vessels capable of surviving years at sea. These ships traveled across the South China Sea and into the Indian Ocean, enduring saltwater exposure that would quickly destroy untreated wood. What made those ships endure wasn't luck, it was process. Historical accounts, including those recorded by the Venetian traveler Marco Polo, describe how builders combined tung oil with lime and fibrous materials to create a sealant that bonded deeply with the wood. The result wasn't just a coating sitting on the surface, it became part of the structure itself, resisting water in a way that European shipbuilders at the time could not replicate. The reason lies in chemistry, though the craftsmen themselves didn't need to understand it in modern terms. Tung oil doesn't behave like most finishes people are familiar with today. It doesn't simply dry, it transforms. When exposed to oxygen, the oil undergoes a reaction that links its molecules together into a solid network. Instead of forming a brittle layer on top of the wood, it penetrates into the grain and hardens within it. The wood becomes internally reinforced, resistant to moisture while still able to expand and contract naturally. This distinction matters more than most people realize. Modern synthetic finishes, like varnishes and polyurethanes, create a hard shell on the surface. That shell can look perfect at first, but wood is a living material. It moves with temperature and humidity. Over time, the rigid coating cracks. Once that happens, water gets trapped beneath it, accelerating decay in a way that is often invisible until it's too late. Tung oil avoids this entirely by becoming part of the wood rather than sitting on top of it. For centuries, this knowledge remained concentrated in East Asia. That changed in the early 20th century, when American agricultural explorers began introducing tung trees to the United States. The goal wasn't academic curiosity. It was strategic independence. At the time, tung oil was already recognized as one of the best natural protective coatings available, and relying on foreign imports for such a material was seen as a vulnerability. The Gulf Coast states turned out to be ideal for cultivation. From Florida through Mississippi and into Texas, farmers began planting tung orchards as a new cash crop. By the 1930s, the industry had grown into a major economic force. Entire communities were built around it. Processing mills were established, festivals were held, and millions of trees were planted across tens of thousands of acres. Then came World War II, and tung oil became more than just a commercial product. It was classified as a strategic material. Military equipment required protection against moisture and corrosion, especially in tropical environments. Tung oil was used in coatings for ships, ammunition, and other critical supplies. At the same time, researchers explored its potential as a fuel substitute when petroleum resources were strained. For a brief period, this ancient material stood at the center of modern industrial and military efforts. But even as it reached its peak importance, the conditions for its decline were already forming. Synthetic chemistry was advancing rapidly. Industrial manufacturers developed alternatives that could be produced in factories, independent of agricultural cycles. These products were faster to apply and easier to scale. They didn't necessarily perform better over the long term, but they fit the demands of a market increasingly driven by speed and convenience. At the same time, environmental factors began to take their toll. Tung trees are sensitive to cold, and repeated frost events damaged crops across the American South. Farmers who had invested heavily in the industry faced unpredictable losses. Then came the final blow. In August 1969, Hurricane Camille struck the Gulf Coast with devastating force, destroying vast areas of tung orchards. Recovery would have required years of replanting and investment, but by then, cheaper synthetic alternatives had already taken over the market. By the early 1970s, the American tung oil industry had effectively collapsed. Production ceased, and the knowledge associated with it faded from mainstream use. Not because it stopped working, but because the economic environment no longer supported it. What matters now is that none of this changed the underlying reality. The oil still behaves exactly as it always has. The same chemical reaction that protected ancient ships still occurs every time it is applied correctly. The difference is that today, most people have never been taught how to use it properly. Walk into a hardware store, and you'll likely find products labeled as tung oil finish. In many cases, these are not pure tung oil at all. They are mixtures containing solvents, synthetic resins, and additives designed to speed up drying time. While they may have their uses, they do not replicate the original process or its results. Understanding this distinction is critical if you want the real benefits. Using pure tung oil requires patience, but the process itself is straightforward. The wood must be properly prepared, sanded smooth, and cleaned of all dust. The first applications are typically thinned to allow deeper penetration into the grain. The goal is not to coat the surface, but to saturate the wood so that the oil can polymerize from within. Application involves keeping the surface wet long enough for the oil to soak in fully. Once the wood stops absorbing it, all excess must be wiped away. This step cannot be skipped. Any oil left sitting on the surface will cure improperly, creating a sticky or uneven finish. What remains inside the wood is what provides the protection. Each coat requires time to cure, and the full process can take weeks. This is where most modern users lose patience. Synthetic finishes offer speed, but they trade away longevity and ease of maintenance. Tung oil demands time up front, but once it has fully cured, the result is a finish that does not peel, chip, or trap moisture. Maintenance is where its advantages become clear. When a synthetic coating fails, it often requires sanding or stripping before reapplication. With tung oil, maintenance is as simple as applying another thin coat. It bonds directly with the existing finish, restoring protection without removing what's already there. There is one critical safety consideration that cannot be ignored. The curing process generates heat. Rags used during application can spontaneously combust if left crumpled in an enclosed space. They must be laid flat to dry or stored in water before disposal. This is not a rare occurrence. It is a well-documented hazard. It's also important to understand the limitations. Tung oil is not the best choice for surfaces subjected to heavy abrasion, such as commercial flooring. It requires time and care to apply correctly. And while it provides excellent moisture resistance, it does not make wood immune to all environmental damage without occasional maintenance. What it does offer is something increasingly rare, a method that aligns with the natural behavior of the material it protects. It doesn't fight the wood. It works with it. That's why it has endured for thousands of years, across different cultures and technologies. The disappearance of tung oil from mainstream use is not a story of failure. It's a reminder of how easily effective solutions can be replaced by faster, more convenient alternatives, even when those alternatives are objectively less durable. Markets prioritize scalability and repeat purchases. Tung oil, by its nature, doesn't fit that model. But for those willing to step outside that system, the knowledge is still there. The trees still grow. The oil is still produced, and the process still works exactly as it always has. If you've made it this far, you now have access to a piece of practical history that most people overlook. Use it, test it.
Apply it to something
that matters, whether it's a tool, a structure, or a long-term project.
Yes.
This is the kind of knowledge that rewards patience and attention to detail. If you found value in this, subscribe and share it with someone who appreciates real, tested methods over quick fixes. There's a lot more out there that has been forgotten, and we're just getting started.